Awesome. Everyone, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us on a Wednesday lunchtime in Sydney. I'm really pleased to be joined by three epic panelists, which we will shortly introduce. But my name's Jono. I'm one of the founders of Earlywork. We're building the fastest, fairest way to begin a career in tech. And we are running Australia's or APAC's first tech sales bootcamp where you only pay once you land a job, which is called Earlywork Academy. Our applications are open now, so for any aspiring tech sales reps on the call, recommend signing up. But today, we are running a super special event on how to build great sales teams in 2023. I'll start off with a bit of context, and then we'll get into to introduce our lovely panelists on the line. But basically, we'll talk and answer some questions for half an hour or so, and then we will shoot it over to the audience, and would love to get some questions in and hear from all of your awesome insights today. But where are we today? So 2023, it may seem like, the world is ending. We've seen, some layoffs, some changes. The market looks different to what it was prior, where everything kind of seemed up and to the right. It was almost hard for some sales reps not to make quota. Promotions were coming thick and fast. And some of it all seemed a bit too good to be true. Fast forward to today, things have started to change a little bit. We've seen some layoffs from some of the bigger tech companies, hiring freezes, quotas being missed, and an outlook that's uncertain. Some think that, this may be the new normal, and others are sort of patiently waiting for normality to resume. We're not here to tell you exactly where we are on the spectrum, but pleased to get insight into how some of the best sales leaders in the country are thinking about this problem and planning, and unpack what this means for retaining, hiring, and performing when it comes to sales talent in 2023. So would love to formally introduce our panelists and hear from them a bit around what they do now and what their first sales role was and how they got into sales in the first place. And maybe we'll kick off with Tom.
Sure. Yeah, thanks everyone for taking the time to join us. My name is Tom Richardson. I'm responsible for the startup and SMB business for Stripe across Asia Pacific. Stripe is a global fintech company headquartered in the US. And my first sales job. So actually, I had a gap year between school and university, and I was a ticket tout and punch chauffeur in Cambridge in the United Kingdom, which sounds like a very strange first job to be talking about in sales, but actually was one of the most interesting and rewarding sales jobs I've ever had, because we took a 25% commission from every ticket we managed to sell to unsuspecting tourists who walked through Cambridge, and then we punted them up and down the river and told them all sorts of semi-true things about the history of Cambridge University and all the buildings they were seeing. And it was a ruthless industry. I was physically threatened a number of times, it was a really, really cutthroat sales environment, as genteel as it sounds. And so I often reflect on that as my kind of foundational experience in sales that made me passionate about it. And I expected to work for 6 months, and like this classic sales story, ended up kind of semi-retiring after 3 months and going traveling early because I'd made enough money to fund the rest of the year, which was great.
Amazing. Pretty unique story. Toni, what about you?
Hi, Jono. Toni, I'm head of sales at Equal. Equal is a pre-Series A startup that aims to get products into the hands of real fans. So fairness is our power. We hate it when you miss out on the thing you love. And so whether that's sneakers or, concert tickets or access to your favorite sports star or collectibles, that's what we do. My first sales gig, I did technical undergrad. So I came into sales as a developer. So I was already very much in the minority of my graduating year. I think I was one of 4 girls in a class of 400. Sadly, those numbers haven't changed a huge amount, and I wanted to be a developer, and then I got taken out of the development team and put into a sales team at Microsoft because I talked too much. So I was deemed to be distracting, but actually my mentor at the time could see that I would have a more successful career in sales, and so he put me in a pre-sales role there. I told all of my friends for 2 years that I was a project manager because I didn't want to say that I was a salesperson, but I was fortunate to work with some really great people at Microsoft right through to global accounts, and then I was comfortable saying I was in sales. So that was the early days.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, which we'll unpack a bit later. Jaye, what about you?
Yeah, hey everyone. Hard to follow the acts of Tom and Toni, but I'm Jaye. I look after the enterprise sales team at Braze. If you've ever shopped on the Iconic or ordered pizza from Pizza Hut or Domino's, you've experienced Braze sending you a message with a tracking update or your order being delivered, or anything in between an SMS, an email, or a push notification from the mobile. So a very fun product to be sitting behind. My first sales role was actually with the co-founder of our local business while I was at university. It was a glorified outsourced BDR business, and we used to just book meetings on behalf of random organizations like Nearmap and Twitter and IBM and Sugar CRM. So a lot of cold calling, but it was a lot of fun.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, yeah, super blessed to have three amazing leaders with really interesting perspectives to unpack some of these insights. We'll start with on hiring. Maybe we'll start with you, Jay. What do you look for when hiring entry-level sales talent?
I think and for context, we've built, the team here has gone from being 2 salespeople to just shy of 20 in the last 3.5 years. And it's been a pretty hard process to make sure that we hire the right people, but the soft skills are the big drivers for us when we look to hire. What are the underlying motivations behind wanting to start a career in sales? What fascinates you about us and the product that you're going to be selling? And how do you present yourself, which I think is a really important one that often is missed in a lot of the interviews that we have.
For sure. So soft skills and motivations for you, Jay. Toni, anything to add on top of that?
Yeah, I think because more often than not, if you fail in a sales cycle, no one will tell you why you've failed. They will just ghost you. You've really got to be able to read the room. And to do that, you've got to really make the most of the fast feedback cycle in sales and be able to pattern match what's working and what's not. If you can do pattern recognition reasonably well, you'll figure out pretty quickly why something you're doing isn't working without anyone having to tell you.
Sure. Tom, anything to add on top of that?
No, I think Jay and Toni nailed it. I think emotional intelligence is such an important part of sales. Like the stereotypical kind of Wolf of Wall Street / Glengarry Glen Ross type salesperson is long gone and good riddance. I think curiosity, thoughtfulness, emotional intelligence. I think the other thing is just organization. If you, especially as a more junior salesperson, a lot of what you get out of your day comes from being repetitively good day after day after day. And if you're not organized and you don't have a system that you can build around that, it can be very difficult to be a true high achiever. And so I'm looking for that kind of organization and methodical thinking that will allow someone to succeed.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think that's a really interesting trend to unpack in a bit more detail, which we may do a bit later. Yeah, interested to hear, obviously you're going through interviews, you're finding really great, perceived like high quality talent. What have you seen that's kind of constantly differentiated those that have, performed well in the interviews at the start and then, coming to the business and perhaps wasn't performing as well versus those that maybe, didn't excel through the interviews, but were just unbelievable from the start? Like, what is sort of maybe the biggest skill gap in terms of like, once they start in the role, that has really differentiated those that may perform well in the interviews to those that have actually gone on to actually perform? Tom, right back at you.
Yeah, so one of the things that I occasionally do during an interview process is based on something that I read in a very good book called The High Growth Handbook by the former CRO of HubSpot, a guy called Mark Robesch. And it's a fantastic book for anyone who's interested in sales. I can't recommend it enough. And one of the things he talks about is he's very unusual, having gone from the first days of HubSpot through to public company as a CRO. Most people kind of age out of it and can't hack it for the whole journey. But he talks about what he looks for and how he recruits salespeople. And one of the things he talks about is quite often he'll ask a salesperson a fairly rudimentary question about how to pitch something to him during an interview process. And then deliberately, once they're mid-flow, he will politely cut them off and he will give them some real-time spot feedback on their answer. And the reason he does that is he says it's a fantastic indicator of how somebody receives that feedback and actions that feedback when they continue is a fantastic indicator of their success. And I've always found that none of us are perfect. None of us have all the answers about how to be great at sales. The thing that makes the great people great and continue to be great once they're hired is the ability to take on process feedback and have that kind of curiosity about how to get better. Because nobody comes into any of these junior roles ready to roll. You have to learn as you go and take your knocks and take the feedback.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a super valuable insight and plus one to the book. Maybe we'll chuck a link in comments, but really compelling read. Toni, anything to build on from what Tom said?
Oh, when I was hiring in like customer service roles, I'd always hire someone who's worked at Macca's because they know how to turn up on time. And that's kind of one of the fundamentals that you need to get when you're like on the phones or on chat or whatever. In sales, this probably and it happened 6 months ago. I had a candidate who was super rough around the edges and had done door-to-door like energy plan selling. And so sign up to or switch energy providers. And she's great. And I thought you can learn everything that you need to learn about the product or about the service. Honestly, really, even super high, like deep tech products, you can learn what you need to learn, but you can't learn resilience and tenacity. And anyone like a door-to-door seller has done the hard yards, and I'd hire a door-to-door seller every day.
Yeah, interesting. Jaye?
Having done door-to-door sales.
I was going to say they're hard to find.
Yeah, I think I need to get a new job. Jaye, what about you?
Beyond what Tom and Toni have talked to, I think that something that we really look for is the due diligence that's gone into the applicant's knowledge before coming into the interview. Like, what do they know about our business? Why is it fascinating for them? How can they take all the information that they may have researched or looked up before coming in and distill it in a really meaningful way back to us? Obviously, it's not going to be perfect, and we're not looking for that. But trying to wrap their head around what we do and where we add value in a practical way is something that we look for. And the reason why we've sort of found that to be important is not because we can teach that to someone. It's not something that's hard to coach through, but we can't teach someone how to view the right pieces of information really quickly and distill it down to something that's going to be valuable for the person on the other side. And that's what we want to see them do with our prospects and our customers, is research their business, find the things that are going to be important, and relay it in a really easy to understand value proposition back to them. And so we kind of try and do that through our own brand, through the interview process.
Yeah, it's super true. I think that makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, all of you have kind of hinted at this, resilience, grit, like type attitude that you look for. Sometimes it may not be immediately obvious, if they haven't had a prior experience where they've just been doors slammed on their face at all times. Like, what are exercises you can do during an interview or questions you can ask that has been effective in screening for that, grit and resilience, type candidate that we look for during these interviews? Anyone have, any they like to call out? We do a lot of role play in our interview process. We get second stage interviews to move through quite a bit of role play. But I also love the question of what was your biggest failure? Why was it a failure? And how have you adapted from that? But role plays are a great way for us to see resilience. Yeah. Tom, you had something to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the questions I like to ask as well is, tell me about a time you didn't get along with somebody in a previous role and why that was the case. And, all of it, like, I've had times where I want to murder at work, right? It's like, it's not unusual and it's not inhuman, right? It's a normal kind of sensation to feel extreme frustration and want to, not literally, but like, to feel that kind of intense frustration with things that are not going the way you want them to go. But the important thing you're looking for is somebody able to introspect on the other person's perspective in that situation? Are they able to understand why somebody was behaving the way they were? And are they introspective and reflective about what they could have done differently? And that is quite an important predictor of resilience, I think, because if you believe the whole world is against you and that everyone else is at fault, you will always find reasons why you should give up doing something. Whereas if you can grind through with an understanding that, like, most people's intent is good and you've got to find a way to capitalize on that, then you'd like to be successful.
Yeah, for sure. Toni, any other novel exercises or questions you picked up over your time?
think you can deduce hardship as well. I think you can ask someone what's the hardest thing you've had to get through, but sometimes in interview processes, particularly for junior people, like I'm very literal. So if you ask me a question, I will give you a very literal answer, and that's not great in an interview process. But you can find out, you can ask someone about their background and like about their kind of like what school was like for them or what uni was like for them or what their family life is like or how many, and you can actually work out that somebody has actually gone through hard stuff, and you can kind of dig into those experiences rather than saying kind of what's the hardest thing you've done. And I certainly don't want to stereotype anyone, but I think that you would be able to deduce the difference between someone who has hustled to get to where they are to get that interview with you versus someone who hasn't had to hustle so hard.
For sure. 100%. I think resilience can come in lots of different forms and often kind of push in the same way we do in sales in terms of not taking surface level answers, but digging deeper to find kind of the root cause is a really effective way of doing so. Interested to touch on kind of more recent like macro conditions. I think unless you're living under a rock, people have seen that, some of the biggest like sales companies in the world have been making layoffs. I guess at a surface level, one would assume that makes hiring become a bit easier. Interested to get perspectives on the ground, like how have you seen this, impact hiring across your orgs, whether it sort of has made sourcing easier, but filtering harder. Yeah, interested to get any sort of takes. Maybe Jay, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sourcing has definitely been easier. Filtering has definitely been a lot harder. It's really hard to delineate from those that performed really well versus those that perhaps haven't. I think that we're in a very fortunate position where we're continuing to plow forward, and we've just, again, almost doubled the size of our sales team going into this fiscal year. But I guess one of the trends that we're noticing is that it will take us 10 interviews to find the right person, where previously it was taking us 2 or 3 to find the right person, because the profiles that we had were really specific and very narrowed into what we were looking for. And I think that what's really standing out for us at the moment are the candidates that are going a step further and, reaching out to some of the people that are working in our business to try and understand a little bit about how we operate before they come into the interview, and taking a little bit more of an initiative to set themselves apart from the pack. Has not only from a perspective, we don't really care about it as a perception thing, but they actually end up getting some pretty tangible information that they can then lean on in the interview.
Super interesting. Toni, any insights from you?
I just don't want to gloss over the fact that this is actually a pretty tricky time for a bunch of people who will struggle to reconcile the fact that a working culture that they found really rewarding and that they felt a big part of has now turned out to be a situation where they were impacted by a financial decision. And that's a really hard thing to marry up. A lot of these big tech companies have great cultures and huge development opportunities, and I've worked at a bunch of them, and it is really tricky. It's like, this is the 3rd time in my career I've seen this happen. It will bounce back really quickly. This is a correction on the back of COVID. Like, the first one was a correction on the back of .com. The second one was a correction on the back of the GFC. And so it's hard because tech has this like rich environment. Tech businesses have offered this rich environment for people for so long that when it contracts a little bit, it's really hard for the people who are impacted. So there's a bunch of people impacted, which I think will be feeling a little bit surprised, and that's really tough. To answer your question, it hasn't impacted our hiring because we're not hiring those personas. There's a lot of companies who have been, actually, that's not entirely true. There's a bunch of startups have been impacted as well, which is even more heartbreaking because it's even harder to, like, it would have been an even harder decision to make. But when you're a young company, we're about 50 people, we've got a tiny sales team and a much larger product and eng team. We've got this luxury of hiring from not necessarily a traditional SaaS mature persona. We can hire someone who's maybe better at the category and has an opportunity to learn in other places. So for us, that might be in streetwear or collectibles or whatever that is. But I do think that maybe there will be a excess of great people in the market at the moment, and some of those people potentially will be a little bit distressed. And so that's pretty tough to watch, but it hasn't impacted us.
Yeah, and Toni, I think it called out a really important point. Any advice you build on for folks that may be within that like impacted camp? Suggestions. Obviously, it's very easy for us in this panel just to give like generic advice, but from your experience and having maybe gone through more than once, maybe form of reassurance or anything else that comes to mind to share with perhaps that group.
My observation, having worked in and around salespeople who have earned a lot of money over time, is that just always have a little nest egg. And so that's probably just for the young people on the call. There's nothing that'll create more distress for you than financial distress and personal family distress. They're the two big, they'll be much harder than any kind of work stress that you'll feel. And so if you've lived up to your means because you've earned well, because you've been in good software selling sales roles, and there's a whole bunch of them that have been, that will be tricky because it might be a year before you find the thing that you're looking to find. But like all of these things, like in business, you never waste a crisis, but in your personal life, never waste a crisis. Use it to kind of do the thing that you want to do while you're finding your next job. But I think the thing that you should always sit with is that in tech, there has been almost zero job uncertainty forever. Whereas in a lot of other industries that are automating, like you'll have friends who work in other industries, there's job uncertainty. And most people in tech will be thinking, well, I don't feel that because I'm very fortunate to work in tech, but just know that everyone is, a little bit vulnerable to like macro conditions like this. And so just be personally prepared for them would be the thing I'd say. It's a bit dark, isn't it? Don't spend all your money.
Tom, would love for you to add anything else you're seeing on the ground in terms of like the changes that's made to hiring, perspective from your own teams that you work with.
Yeah, I mean, I think Toni alluded to this, but it's a strange bifurcated market right now, where on the one hand you have these kind of really tragic personal circumstances where folks who were contributing huge amounts to their company through no fault of their own have found themselves the victims of varying degrees of arbitrariness in decision making that have resulted in them losing their jobs. And I think that's incredibly hard, and especially for early career sales professionals or any professional who's early in their career, it's very hard when you haven't been through the cycles that Toni, myself, Jay have been through, where it's like you see that this happens and you learn over time to be loyal to the people but not to the entity. It's very, very hard when your identity is bound up in the role. I think the flip side, though, for those who are hiring or building companies, is that you wouldn't choose it to be this way, but there has never been a better time to hire talented people, because there are lots of people coming out of very secure companies and positions where they just needed that jolt to get them out of their comfort zone to encourage them to do something maybe a bit more adventurous, maybe earlier stage company. And so, as Jay said, there's going to be a lot of wading through resumes and huge number of applicants per role because of the people on the market. But if you can find a good way to qualify through that group, then there's going to be some great people out there looking. And I think that none of us have ever met somebody who's super motivated and driven and pretty impressive who we didn't want to kind of either keep in touch with for immediate role for the short term or for the medium term, when things do start to pick up. And Toni's right that they will pick up quickly once they do. Those people are going to be in really good positions having spent the time networking. And final, very rudimentary point to anyone who is in this position is just around, obvious advice that I'm sure you've heard many times before, but it's, I wish the world was equitable in a way where, you could file a job application and it would be reviewed and the right people would get the job. But the way the world works, I think, and I'm not saying it should be this way or that, I try to make it more like this way, but I think there is a lot to be said for using your networks where you can and building your networks where you can to find your way into opening doors. Now, that can create its own inequities that I'm not blind to whatsoever, but I guess for being realistic with people, I think that it is an important part of it. And nothing is more heartbreaking than seeing somebody on LinkedIn lamenting the fact that they've submitted 600 job applications and haven't heard back, because that's not always totally surprising, even though it should be.
Yeah, 100%. And appreciate you sharing all that, Tom. I I want to build off that and touch on a slightly different area. And it was a question from the audience we had as well, which I'll build on. And maybe Jay and Tom will have kind of more insights. But around what that's changed to compensation, obviously in a world where it's a lot easier to find talent, maybe you don't need to pay as much for great talent. Like and a question from the audience was, how have you seen sort of changing market conditions affect how you split like base and commission and just overall sales compensation? Maybe Jay would love to hear how you've been approaching that.
In our SDR function, we actually haven't changed anything. Nothing has changed, which I think is a sign of what Toni and Tom have spoken to, that it will bounce back and it'll come back stronger than it was before, and we'll see a strong resurgence. We haven't, like, base salaries are the same, the variable components the same, the OT is the same. We haven't seen much of a dip in that at all. And I think it's also as a result of there is some awesome talent out there, and so they're not going to drop their expectations just to get in the door somewhere, because they have faith in what they can deliver for an organization. So we probably not what the person who posed the question wants to hear. There's really not been much of a change from what I've seen.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Maybe when it comes to, and it may seem a bit strange to talk about it during, the sentiments expressed in times like this, but when it comes to, even in the past, you've got really great, sales talent that are performing super well. Obviously over the past couple of years, it's been really important to, when there's all these other companies coming in, you're potentially offering that person double the salary. Like, what are the best strategies around retention of top sales talent that you've seen that have worked really well? Tom, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I've observed, which is very rudimentary, is that good salespeople want to understand how they're paid and want to understand that it's fair. And it's less about, am I making 140% of target? Am I deep in accelerators, which is like helping me make multiples on everything above 100%, et cetera, et cetera. Where I've seen it fall down and most salespeople leave is they don't believe they're being treated fairly by the way that their compensation plan or their targets or their territories have been structured. And that's compounded by the fact that those things are not communicated well by the entity or entities that are setting those targets, territories, compensation plans. Because a great salesperson will optimize to the molecule of their comp plan to make sure they get every dollar they can out of it. They will understand it deeply, and they will care about it deeply. And I feel like where I've seen trouble in the past is where there isn't as much thought going into the creation of those plans as there is once they're received by the salespeople who then have to go and execute on them.
Mm. And what does a great, sales plan, a commission plan look like?
Yeah, good question. So simple. Firstly, it should not have more than 2 ratchets or instruments in it. If you try and like 4.5 things where there's clawbacks and there's all sorts of like percentage calculations and everything else, like you're just making sure that nobody's going to understand it and find it and everyone's going to find it difficult to execute against. So keep it simple. Maximum of 2 levers on the comp plan, if possible, and compensation drives behavior. So whatever you put in there, you should expect that the behavior, like there's nothing more naive in my experience than people who set policies and then say, yeah, I know the policy says this, but like for the good of the company, we expect people to do X or Y. Like, salespeople are good people generally and good corporate citizens, but you don't mess with their incentives and expect them to do something different. That's just not how it works. So you've got to be, part of what keeping it simple helps with is making sure it's very clear what they've got to do. It's very clear what the expected behavior is from that. And then you wind them up and watch them go. And that can be hugely powerful, but it can be also completely fall over on its face if you've set it up in the wrong way and you're asking people to do things that contradict those incentives.
Mm. Jay, Toni, anything in terms of just other effective retention strategies, bonuses, if it's on top of compensation, that have worked really well in the past, both from what you've seen yourselves as well, just like other people in your business?
I've always found high-performing salespeople are just in general in control of their own career journey as well. And so whether that is someone who is senior and tenured and managing a really large global or strategic account at a software company versus and so has stayed in that role and knows, like, understands the value that that account can bring. And other people might look at that person and say, oh, it's strange they haven't promoted to a manager, but actually everything that they're doing is very deliberate. Versus somebody who kind of has a career trajectory, which is to move into more leadership roles or management roles. Like, they know what they're doing, so just don't get in their way. Like, support them to, if they're staying on the same account and you think they're getting a little bit bored, help them challenge themselves in different ways that allows them to still do the thing that they want. But the earliest indicator that there's no more money to be had from an account is a high-performing salesperson wanting to change accounts. So the trust that the salesperson has done the due diligence to and has the instincts to know where they're going to find success, and then support them in moving in that path, because otherwise you'll lose them.
Yeah, 100%. Jay, anything to build on?
I was just going to lean into what Tony's saying. I think that comp structures and however much you're going to make is great to focus on, and you're not really in sales if you're not focusing on that. But I think that one of the most important things for us, and one of the most rewarding things that I've had the opportunity to do, is work with 4 of our SDRs and bring them up into account executive roles and see them hit their year 1 quota really successfully. And I think a big reason why they've stayed with us is as a result of the fact that we've been really clear on, we'll open all the doors that you want us to open, but you're going to have to take the responsibility of running through them. And so I think career progression has been a big one for us to lean into and make sure that we're fortunate enough that we're a small team and still have that sort of global startup feel to it, that there's a lot of flexibility in people's career paths. And if we don't facilitate that, then we're probably not doing the role that we should be.
100%. Maybe we'll finish on one piece of advice for talent, and then we will move on to a couple of questions from the audience. So Jay's already mentioned, a couple of ways in which he's seen, talent like being able to stand out amidst kind of a different hiring markets, what it was maybe the last 24 months. I would be interested to hear, across the panel, if you were in a aspiring SDR's shoe looking for their first sales job amidst, a pool of a whole lot of other folks who have had, prior sales experience now back into the job market, what's ways in which you can really stand out to be successful amidst, sort of this sort of like changing hiring macro environment?
I'm happy to take that one to start with. Deeply unfashionable advice that I'm sure will not be universally well received, but show up half an hour earlier than everyone else and leave half an hour later than everyone else in an SDR role. Like, you can't go far wrong. It is a consistency and repetitions based success profile in SDR, and that changes as you move through the ranks in sales to be more differentiated and strategic and so forth. But if you can develop the rigor and the discipline on a daily basis to come in, work harder than anybody else, call more people than anybody else, have more time aligning with the reps who you're supporting on territory plans and accounts that you're going to call into this week, and you're organized and disciplined, then that way you will be successful. And there aren't any real shortcuts to that. And in the SDR role, there's fewer shortcuts, because we all know people in sales, and particularly as you become more senior in sales, there's a lot of people out there riding really good territories and really easy targets who aren't particularly impressive. But as an SDR, it's almost impossible to fake your way to success. And so it is hard. It's the hardest job in any software company, in my opinion. And that's why I have a lot of respect for the people who do it and try and support them with that. But yeah, you've got to outwork the nearest person and be more organized and more disciplined, and you'll be successful, which is not what most people want to hear these days, unfortunately.
Yeah,
I'm just a +1 on that. Like, that's I have no more advice.
I think slowly becoming back in fashion. Jay, anything else to build off from what you said before?
I was just going to say that I think I'm a big fan of having a mentor, a coach, and a sponsor whenever you're in any role, to make sure that you can sort of get to where you want to get to next and be successful. And I think when you're an SDR applying for some of these roles, look at your connection, connect with the person that you're interviewing with, connect with other people that are in the organization, and try and find a mutual connection who can sponsor you into that role, get them to sing your praises for you while you're in the interview process, because I think it'll stand out leaps and bounds beyond someone who doesn't have the opportunity to do that. So work your network and see if you can get them to sponsor you into the role.
For sure. Cool. I'll just jump onto some of the audience questions that are coming through. Yeah, this may be a cool one for Toni to get some insight on, but I've got one from Paolo. In an early stage startup, how would you think about the mix of entry-level versus experienced salespeople?
It depends, is the answer. It depends on what capability your founders have. And you've got to kind of plug the gaps. If your founders are really strong sellers, then you don't need senior salespeople, you need entry-level salespeople. If your founders are not sellers, then your first hire should be a senior salesperson who is comfortable like doing all of the basics of carrying a bag. So, and that advice rings true no matter what stage you're at. You've always got to plug the gap that you have in the team, and so you've got to complement the skills. Like I was listening to I think it was your HubSpot CRO, it was the CMO talking about when to hire someone junior and when to hire someone senior, and it's all about where's your black spot. So as a founder or as a leader, like where are the things that you have comfort doing and that you could give reasonable advice if you had to, and where are the things that you wouldn't, and so hire someone senior in the places that you wouldn't.
Cool. Last question, just maybe more on a tactical element from Todd, but on your outbound teams, what specifically is making up your tech stack around data enhancement when it comes to some of those tools like Lusher, Zoom Info, etc.? Maybe Jay, you want to touch on that, or anything that's changed from some of the new tools in the market that have worked really well?
Yeah, sure. We use probably a few too many. We've got Lusher. We use SalesNav. We leverage DataFox and Zoom Info. We've got Aptopia. I think by far the best one that we've seen work for us is Lusher. It pulls through and through. In fact, our co-founder, when I was pitching the business case to buy Lusher for the team, said, if you can find this person's mobile number, and if I call them and if it answers, then I'll buy it. And it did, and it worked. So yeah, I like it.
Gee, that's a pretty good customer case study.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that formally kind of brings us to the close of this event. Just want to extend a massive thank you to Tom, Toni, and Jay for joining us. They have a lot more candid insights to share beyond just this panel as well. So definitely apologies for potentially flooding your inboxes, but definitely feel free to reach out to all of them if you have any other questions. Really exceptional people and really sharp thinkers. For anyone else, we will be having more of these events in future, targeted at job seekers, hiring managers, anyone interested in building a sales career. We'll close with that for now, but thanks all for coming on Wednesday lunchtime, and hopefully we can see you all again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jono. Well done.
All right. See ya.